Yannick, I'm the CEO and co-founder at Archeum. 4 years ago, me and my three other co-founders founded Archeum. Back then, we were called Elusive, and we initially started with CK-based transactional privacy on Solana, and we saw initial volumes of multiple hundreds of millions of US dollars with Elusive. We relatively quickly realized that technological solution itself was too limited to be providing all of the I would say institutional privacy use cases that we predict that we would need in the future. And so that's why we decided to do a full pivot sort of and rethink how privacy should be built. And we curriculum and started from scratch again and build the most trustless and scalable encrypted computing protocol in the world. My personal background is that I taught myself to program when I was 11 years old. And before founding Archeum, I studied law. While studying law, I developed an app which became the most sold productivity app on the Apple App Store, which then led me to reconsider my choice of study in law, and I instead studied mathematics and computer science, and that's where I met my co-founders. So so the solution back then was similar to how most of crypto privacy still to this day looks like, which is purely Zcash-like CK-based privacy, where and that's the core issue I see. Let me stop sharing my screen. So that's the core issue that I see, which is what I call isolated encrypted state. So if we look at Ethereum or Solana, right, what those bring is public shared state. That's sort of the core value of a blockchain, if you will, right? And by adding CK, what we are slapping onto it is isolated encrypted state, which is really, to be honest, more of a Web2 thing, where we say we have data that is isolated. I have a secret, you have a secret, and then each of us can generate a zero-knowledge proof over our secret, publish that on the blockchain. But the inherent limitation of that is that those secrets can never interact with each other. And so we can never build complex applications, like, for example, trading applications, or we cannot even allow a smart contract to, on its own, have a private balance. That's why we built encrypted shared state with Archeum, where we can all of those use cases. So I think that really lies at the core of the question how privacy will look like in the future. To begin with, so the way Archeum functions is that Archeum itself is just a purely strictly computational network that runs our so-called Cerberus protocol, which is a MPC, secure multi-party computation protocol. And what we are bringing on Solana, for example, is we have around 30 bigger teams actively building with Archeum. And as a Solana developer, you can simply, within your smart contract now, specify, I want this account state, I want this instruction data, I want this function to be private, to be encrypted. So you don't need to build anything new. You just add one line of code that says encrypted, basically, and then Archeum takes care of that. So we've built a custom Rust compiler for that, which compiles that for the developer, Archeum, everything, right, and everything is abstracted away. So developers can add that within their smart contracts, which on its own adds immense new design space for developers. But what we've developed on top of that, together with Solana Labs, is CSPL, the confidential SPL token standard, which enables for the first time ever what we call confidential smart token accounts. So what you can do with CSPL is you can take any existing token and you can make it confidential. But beyond that, you can have a smart contract that now has a confidential balance. So let's say you want to do confidential payroll as the most simple use case. So you can now have a multi-sig smart contract, for example, where you don't know the amount of tokens, the amount of, let's say, USDZ or USDT that lie in that treasury, and you can pay your employees through that via a smart contract with encrypted transactions flowing to all of the balances of the employees without you having to manage a decryption key. The smart contract does that for you. You can just have secure multi-sig keys, right? And you can support any existing token. And that's really only the most simple application. The big value add that CSPL brings is not just for on-chain programs, but also for wallets. Because what we encountered when we were building this CK-based privacy prior to Archium is that when we were working on integrating that into all of the different Solana wallets, that had way too much friction and broke all of the UX expectations, basically, both of developers and users, because you couldn't just do normal transactions. You couldn't just use your private assets within normal transactions, but now you can do that. Now, literally all you need to do is pass a signature to a smart contract, and the smart contract can do something with your encrypted balance on your behalf, which sort of is a crazy concept, right? And you can, within one single atomic operation within Solana, switch between private and public representation. So you can always go back to public or go to confidential. And then let's say use a dark pool that utilizes confidentiality, or even use some protocol that doesn't even use confidentiality, right? All of that is possible. And so it is strictly logical for all of the wallets to, by default, move into private by default, yeah. Yes, so Archium executes those computations. And the way Archium does that, Archium is not a blockchain network. It is literally just this computing network. What we've developed for that over the last year is the Cerberus protocol. And Cerberus is based on secure multi-party computation. So MPC mostly has in the past been used for things like secure key management. But what allowed us to leverage that core primitive and turn it into an encrypted computing protocol is that we've overcome one of the core limitations of MPC that has existed in the past, which is that MPC in the past has always required you to have honest majority trust against whatever network executes it, right? So it means, say there's 100 nodes and you use MPC to do a private computation with that. You would have to trust that 51 out of those nodes are honest, which is a incredibly bad trust assumption when it comes to privacy, right? 51 of those nodes are honest. So with Cerberus, you only have to trust that out of those 100 nodes, there is one single honest node. Doesn't matter which one. And the thing is, it could also be you, Cisao, that you are the honest actor because you don't want to be undermined, right? So there's this reasonable element of, okay, 1 out of 100 is reasonable to assume, but even if that's too high of a trust assumption for you, let's say you're Jupiter building confidential trading, you would also run one node yourself as a protocol, and then the trust assumption is literally 0. And that took a lot of cryptographic work to build the first ever dishonest majority protocol. And on top of that, Cerberus under the hood supports a lot of different operations. All of that is abstracted away from the user and developer, because the developer just writes normal computer programs. But the cool thing really is, if we look at CSPL, for example, we are not just saying, well, your balance is this encrypted value, you're transferring this encrypted amount, and so we are subtracting that from your balance and adding that to the recipient's balance, which would be the most simple version of a confidential transfer. What we're also doing there is we say we additionally generate 3 zero-knowledge proofs within that encrypted computation to add additional verifiability of the correctness of the computation, which sort of is almost overkill, to be honest, which get verified on top of Solana. All assets remain on Solana. And we can do so in 120 milliseconds. So that means that since Archium itself is parallelized, we can do 20,000 confidential transfers per second, which, to be frank, is insane. If we look at comparable privacy technology. So if you, for example, look at fully homomorphic encryption, FHE by Zama, for example, what we currently are processing on an operational level is between 16,000 to 25,000 times more operations per second, while at the same time, Cerberus is more trustless, even though on paper it shouldn't be more trustless than FHE. But FHE, and that's the funny thing, in practice also requires MPC, because they need to match decryption keys using MPC. And that means that they run effectively an honest majority MPC protocol that is many orders of magnitude slower. And on top of that, Archium itself will, within the next 6 months, scale an additional 400 times. And so all of those things, all of those cryptographic decisions, the way that we've designed both the Cerberus protocol and Archium have really come from this initial realization about CK-based privacy and building space. And what we did back then when we were building that was we took a top-down approach. We basically said, okay, we have CK, so now we're going to build privacy, as everyone did in the privacy space. And with Archium, we changed that. We switched to a bottom-up approach, where we began by looking at all of the applications and use cases that we want to enable. And based on that, we designed the protocol. Based on that, we took all of the design decisions, which include something like the encrypted data needs to be able to be stored on chain. You cannot add additional trust layers like other protocols require. So all of those design decisions really come from looking at applications and products first, and then building Archium. So what it also means for CSPL is that we haven't built Archium and CSPL just like most infrastructure projects do, as pure infrastructure, and then we say, okay, hopefully teams just use it, and we are done. But we built CSPL specifically as a revenue product, where we are charging a 10 basis points fee once it's live, with which we are projecting $229 million in revenue for Archium by the end of 2027. Yeah, and so in total, what we've done over the last 1.5 years since Archium. Yes, every transaction. Yeah, and so what we've done over the last 1.5 years is we've built this protocol, the Cerberus protocol, which beats state-of-the-art comparable privacy protocols by orders of magnitude. We've built an ecosystem of, now those numbers are slightly outdated, more than 30 teams, including some of the bigger names like Jupiter building confidential trading, so dark pools with Archium. We also have teams building confidential lending. All of that I call encrypted capital markets. We have teams that are building institutional products like Squads, where they're doing Altitude and Grid, which are their neobanking products for which they require privacy, right? And then we have all of the wallets integrating Archium with CSPL to bring privacy to all of their users. But we also have teams like Umbra, for example, which is a team that we incubated as our first, ecosystem team that fully went all in into building on top of Archium around 7 months ago. And we helped them to perform the largest ICO in Solana history, where they received $155 million in on-chain commitments on MetaDAO. And that team specifically is basically an anonymity layer, a compliant anonymity layer on top of Archium, which is very nice because then there's companies that want to have confidentiality, they use CSPL, but then there's also companies that want to have anonymity, so they're using Umbra. But Umbra under the hood also uses CSPL and Archium for everything, which produces revenue for us. But also additionally, we get a 40% revenue share from everything that Umbra does, and they themselves are also building neobanking products. And I'm sure you're familiar because you have looked at privacy in the past, right? At privacy projects. And in the privacy space, the amount of traction that we have seen within this basically 1 year of existence is very unique. Having so many teams actively building on top of us, basically having this high level of demand of teams saying, when is Archium finally gonna go live? In the last Solana hackathon, we've seen more than 200 teams actively building with the Archium stack. Within Solana, there's basically Colosseum, right, which is the Y Combinator of Solana, who are doing a lot of hackathons, and MetaDAO, and both have a lot of teams that now fully depend on Archium, sort of, and they are always DMing me, when is Archium going live? So Archium mainnet alpha will go live end of this month, and then CSPL will launch together with Solana Labs, most likely around end of February. And we are planning to be performing our ICO around that time as well. We have offers from basically most large centralized exchanges to be doing a public sale together with them, and we're currently deciding which partner to utilize. And so we are raising a pre-TGE VC round before that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 And so, yeah. No, what I was just wanting to say is, beyond that, what I can add, so 1 year ago, and that's the reason why we're able to move so fast and build this technology out with that rapid speed, is because 1 year ago, we also acquired our largest Web2 competitor. So Infer had been leading in the traditional confidential computing space, and they did a lot of work for the US Department of Defense and the European Commission. And I think, so what we did in the acquisition, we acquired their tech, which is the only encrypted computing protocol in the world that allows you to do encrypted machine learning and inference. We, for example, use that protocol to run fully encrypted DeepSeek R1 around 1 year ago when DeepSeek launched. We are not focused on that right now. I think that's important. We are fully focused, hyper-focused on this lighthouse use case of confidential transfers and encrypted capital markets. And down the line, we'll be facilitating those use cases of encrypted machine learning and trying to get into all of those traditional sectors as well. But I think it really speaks for the kind of customers that Archium will see in the future, with even way more institutional usage of this network. And I think you're familiar with those desires. I don't know. I think for Filecoin, it has never really worked to the extent that they wanted, to get Filecoin as this big network where everyone stores their data. But for computing, it can look different. So for example, we have the Charité, which is Europe's largest hospital, who have approached us around 9 months ago. And they're currently performing 4 clinical medical trials on top of Archium, where they're taking actual sensitive patient data, encrypted, and train machine learning models on top of Archium with that. And then in phase 2, they're going to be starting, once those research papers are finished, they're going to be starting to build a commercial platform on top of Archium. And with that commercial platform, they'll be allowing a lot of hospitals within Europe to send their encrypted data to Archium and then commercialize those encrypted machine learning models, which is nice because facilitating that use case right now does not cost me any resources because they can literally just use Archium as is. But it allows us to, in parallel, sort of start building up traction with traditional players so that once Archium has reached significant enough scale through confidential transfers, which I see as the core revenue driver in the initial phase, and dark pools and confidential lending and stuff, we can also scale with those more traditional use cases in the future. Because of Archium. So it's interesting. When we acquired that company, there were still ongoing grants with the United States government and the European Commission. And we were at this decision to either continue with those grants or stop those grants. We would have received a couple of millions for continuing those grants. But we explicitly said we don't want to do that. Simply because I don't see that as a scaling revenue model. I don't want to chase grants, especially not government grants, where I need to input a lot of resources. I want actual scaling long-term business, right? That's why we said, okay, we're not going to be doing those grants. Instead, we are fully focusing on crypto, and then by leveraging that as growth accelerator, we'll be able to build actual commercial products in the traditional world down the line. Yeah. So we did some very good negotiations with them. And at the end of the day, why we as a smaller company that is way younger, they were around for 8 years. They did the most important cryptographic research in the entirety of private computing over the last 8 years. Why we were able to acquire them was, I think it boils down to all of the founders of that company being Berkeley and Harvard professors, and them having a lot of knowledge about research and cryptography, but failing a bit on the go-to-market side of things, because their business model boiled down to doing grants and doing research projects, and it took them 7 years to build the tech, and then only within the last year, and then we acquired them, and they started to commercialize things. And so for us, it was very comfortable. We were able to sort of employ a few tactics that then allowed us to negotiate them down by 90% of their initial ask, and do a cash-only deal. And this kind of deal, especially with the PhDs that we acquired from them, who collectively have published 79 cryptographic papers, is a no-brainer deal that I would say any serious company in the world would, with the blink of an eye, take as a deal. So we ourselves have in total raised 15 million as of now. We've raised from VCs like Greenfield, Coinbase Ventures, Jump, Longhash, and beyond that, we have around 150 angels, including founders of Solana, Jupiter, Monad, Mega Eve, Mert from Helios, and many, many more. And so we are currently raising this pre-TGE round of $7.5 million, and have to close that before we're doing TGE. What I essentially want to do is I want to get strategic investors on board that share the same long-term vision of enabling institutional products with privacy. And the previous private valuation that we had sits at $100 million. 7.5 million. The valuation itself, I would say, isn't entirely fixed right now. I'm basically basing that off of previous private valuation at 100 million US dollars. I think that would, if you look at comparable privacy competitors, I'm gonna share the data room with you if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet. I think all of them are trading beyond 1 billion. And yeah, they don't have any traction. So the fundraising history itself is that we did a pre-seed round and a seed round, and then we did a echo public sale, which itself is a private round, also with vesting. So there we were the first team to do a bigger public sale there, where we sold 1 million US dollars within 1 minute, with the same vesting terms, so also at a $100 million valuation. And then since we are not big fans of airdrops, and we've always, basically since the beginning, communicated that Arcium will not be doing an airdrop, we did a community sale via CoinList around 1 year ago, where we sold 2% at a $200 million public valuation without vesting. And so that's a public valuation sort of versus private valuation, the last valuations we had. Those were in 22 and 23. It was 25 million. And that was co-led by Longhash. How we got to know them? So one of my co-founders, Julian, he at that time, because at that time we just started founding the company, right? I was still in university studying mathematics, and I left then. Julian left university as well, but at that time he was simultaneously on his exchange semester in Singapore, and so he was spending a lot of time at the Longhash office, and got to know all of them very closely. And yeah, they loved our team, and shared this vision. And at that time, right, we were still building a different product. And once we decided to build Arcium, I have to say I'm very grateful for Longhash and the other VCs that we had, because all of them really supported us in this transition to this bigger vision, right? Initially, it was more of an application thing, and then we became this big network that now serves all of the teams on Solana. Will in the next step sort of serve teams across all of crypto, and then go even far beyond that. Oh, no. We've only been I've been a teacher at the Longhash Accelerator instead. Yeah. Interesting. Wow. Yes. Yeah. That's the function of the token. Staking it in order to be a validator, slashing it for our censorship resistance mechanism. If there's anyone attempting to undermine the network, they get slashed. And value accrual is intended to be fully within the token. So I would say both CPU and GPU. It really depends on the kind of application. So the network itself is partitioned, if you will, into clusters, and those are the dishonest majority clusters that run computations. So you as an application as Jupyter, for example, for your dark pool, you would run in a cluster of 100 nodes, that run specific hardware. And you might say, okay, I want to process even more order matches, more transactions, right? Let's upgrade this cluster to use GPUs, because then we can use Cerberus, GPU acceleration, whatever, right? So there's this element of specialization where those clusters can be picked based on what kind of operations you're running. You could say, okay, I have this cluster and my application only does something like Fireblock secure key management, right? So they only need to sign transactions every now and then. We don't need GPUs. We just want to have as decentralized cluster as possible, right? So there's a lot of different things you can do there. And if you look at something like the cluster that the Charité, this hospital, is going to be using, there, for example, you will want to have GPUs simply because you're performing those ML operations. You can do a lot of GPU acceleration there. GPU acceleration still is something in our upgrade roadmap, so we don't even use that yet. And if we compare that to the benchmarks we're comparing against, those are being executed on 8H100 clusters. So running those fucking slow computations costs you 100K per month, and you can get something like 30 confidential TPS. While Arcium, you're running on cheap CPU hardware in globally distributed nodes, while you can get millions of TPS, confidential operations per second with that. And so with GPU acceleration, those numbers are going to be exploding on top of that. But yeah, it always depends on the use case, I would say. And those clusters can define custom fees on top of that. So we have CSPL as this core revenue driver, but the network itself can also produce significant revenue, I would say more down the line, right? With specialization of those clusters based on the tasks and the hardware that they're using and the composition of those clusters, and whatever use case they're serving. So that's why, for example, for those Web2 use cases, there can be a way different fee model for them than for crypto use cases, for example, because we're working with institutional users, and it doesn't really matter if the computations are more expensive, because the cluster can specialize for that use case, and institutional users are fine with that. For FPGAs, so I'm not an expert in FPGAs. I would say for sure, for all of the local operations, there can be additional performance boosts with that. I think, practically speaking, we are today already on the local operation side of things, getting close to what we need. So a lot of that stuff is going to be overkill. And once demand side grows beyond what we can offer, something like this can make sense for sure. Yeah. The CPUs that we're using. So I think in the benchmarks it's surprising. So let me actually look at the exact specs. So in the benchmarks, we only use AMD EPYC 7451 with 24 cores and 2.3 gigahertz, which is not amazing CPUs, right? That's cheap CPUs. It costs you to run an entire server with that, with 128 gigabytes of RAM, something like $100 per month. And you can process all of that. On testnet, yes, on testnet, yeah. We have validators. So the testnet, that's only nodes run by us, because it would be tedious to get all of the validators to upgrade there. But we're currently there's validators already running, who will then be used to enable mainnet alpha end of this month. So we have, for example, Mert, right, who has Helios running nodes, and many of the other institutional node operators for Solana and other blockchain networks are running nodes as well. So yeah. In the beginning, yeah. In the beginning, yeah. From whom? So we have in the past we've had node operators join those rounds. We're not explicitly raising from node operators. No. Um, not that much. So we, I mean, I would call it a legendary deal of the 21st century that we did. So as I said, we were able to negotiate them down by 90%, which means if you look at the talent that we acquired, they are hyper specific PhDs who've studied very specific areas of encrypted computing. One of those PhDs is the co-inventor of TFHE. All of them have crazy research and I guess implementation also as an engineer's track record. So even getting those team members would have been more expensive if we were to have used headhunters. And on top of that, we got 32 patents and their technology. 17 people. Yes. The burn rate is around 300,000 per month. We have enough runway for 1 more year or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully, I mean, based on our projections, that would be this year. So end of this year. Yeah. So yeah. Good question. So Solana will only be the first network that we're supporting. We will expand to basically every blockchain network, I would say. It's more of a question of which network to choose next, right? I think that's the core question. Solana itself, so we are, I would say, the most anticipated launch within Solana by far. And I think value-wise, why we initially chose Solana 3.5 years ago has really been this mindset of building products, applications, building real-world usage, right? Because that's what most of the teams within Solana are doing. If you go to Breakpoint and listen to those keynotes, it really is, okay, we are building this new neobanking product and we've signed 200 customers, things like that, right? And so we want to serve those use cases. We want to serve actual use cases. We don't want to build privacy as this political thing. We want to build privacy as a superior technology that enables new applications. And that's why I think this match has been perfect on Solana, to be doing that with all of the teams there. Yeah, I would say it has been amazing because the Solana community really loves Archeum. And I mean, Archeum itself is soon gonna be growing way bigger than all of that, right? So, for example, on Monday I'll be flying. On Saturday I'll be flying to the US because on Monday I'll be interviewed on more or less America's second largest podcast by Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you're familiar with Tucker Carlson. He's basically he's at the largest talk show on Fox News. He's the reason why Trump got the presidency. And he wanted to interview me about Archeum and this technology that we are building, right? And he has this enormous mainstream audience of millions of listeners. So through things like that, paired with our public sale, there will be a lot of mainstream association as well of Archeum being this new privacy technology that none of the people have ever heard of. Because the two of us, we know what CK is, what MPC is, what all of those things are. But if you think of a normal retail person, right? They don't have a clue. They don't even know this technology exists. So Archeum is soon gonna be synonymous with this kind of privacy technology within mainstream. And that will also allow us to facilitate more government contracts, defense contracts, things like that via the network pretty soon, I would say. So for the network itself, it does not cost us anything. Because the network itself is already from the get-go designed to allow for any network to be supported. That's why how we build it. The only thing we need to do basically is build two smart contracts for whatever blockchain network we're supporting. And then the question is, what kind of tooling do we expose to the users? What we've built for Solana is we've built Arcis, which is our Rust compiler, which enables developers to just write normal smart contract code, right? And it compiles to Archeum code automatically. So we just need to do that for other smart contract platforms as well, for whatever languages they're using. I think it's important to abstract everything away, to remove all friction points, remove all obstacles. So that's what we're doing. Yeah, and so I would say engineering-wise, it is almost negligible. Takes a few months. One engineer, I would say, that spends 1/4 on integrating that network. Yeah, so it's definitely gonna be EVM, and we've been approached by a lot of different networks in recent times, including Monad and Base, and so I think realistically speaking, if we look at the usage statistics, it would make a lot of sense to be supporting Base, for example, as next network. No, there isn't. No, this is a maybe if we support them, there will be. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. As a Swiss in Switzerland association, non-profit association, and also a development company there. So 3 of us 4 co-founders are German, 1 is Swiss. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll soon be expanding with an entity in the US as well. And we'll be hiring more people in the US because that just strategically makes so much sense now with the Genius Act and a lot of regulation passing there. also you need to have an entity there to do all of the government contracts. So yeah, we'll be expanding that. We have teams from Asia. Now for the TG, for example, we are preparing a lot to also community-wise be heavily expanding in Korea, things like that. Yeah, so we are basically having this focus now of US and Asia, I would say. Good question. I think it's hard to measure sometimes, right? Because they're helping with introductions, like introducing the two of us, right? So I think that's the core value add that I've been seeing there. Yeah, one of my co-founders also sits in Hong Kong, so he lives in Hong Kong. My CTO lives in Hong Kong. Yeah. Yes. I'll share the data room. We also have a memorandum in there with more information, a text. Yeah. Yeah. I would like to sort of understand how you're thinking about privacy and what's the most interesting use case that you're specifically seeing in that world. Sounds great. All right. Yeah, I'll share the data room with you. Please have a look. All right. It was a pleasure. See you soon. Bye.